Morning, everybody. Welcome to this Texas Digital Library hosted webinar on the Texas Data Repository, a year in review. We're going to be joined by a number of presenters, all members of our TDR steering committee, to talk a little bit about their experiences using the Texas Data Repository over the past year plus. My name is Christy Park. I'm the Executive Director of the Texas Digital Library. And I'm excited to MC today and also to pinch hit a little bit for one of our TDR steering committee members. I will note that we have started recording this webinar and we'll make it available on our YouTube channel as soon as we're able, so you'll have it for reference. Before we get started, I just want to briefly orient you to the controls in BlueJeans that you should see across the top of your screen. You can toggle on and off your webcam and microphone by using these first two buttons showing the camera and mic icons. And your microphone should be muted when you come into the meeting, and we ask that you keep it muted unless you're speaking to reduce noise in the meeting room here. If you're having audio issues using your computer audio or mic, you can switch to phone audio by clicking on that little down arrow next to the microphone icon. If you have questions during the course of our presentation today, you can use the chat window, which you'll see in the upper right corner of the screen. Just click on that to open up chat and enter your questions, and we will answer them as we have an opportune moment. We'll also have time at the end of the set of presentations to have more extensive Q&A as well. One final note, if you experience technical difficulties during the presentation, you can let us know in chat. I'm also going to put my email address in the chat window, so you can also email me offline to deal with any issues, and hopefully we can get those resolved. And hopefully we won't have any. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Jessica Logan, who from the University of Texas at Austin Libraries, who is our outgoing chair of the Texas Data Repository, to get us started today. Jessica?
Thank you, Christy. I think my mic's working. Yeah, like you said, I'm Jessica Logan. I'm here at University of Texas at Austin, where I'm the coordinator of our Research Data Services unit. And like Christy mentioned, I was the chair in our first year of the Texas Data Repository Steering Committee. This presentation is actually a sort of a redo of a panel presentation that we gave this May at the Texas Conference on Digital Libraries. And the title says it's a year in review. It's even farther on from a year, closer to about a year and a half now that we've been working together on this project. As you may know, TDL launched the Texas Data Repository service as a full-blown consortial service in January 2017 on the heels of some amazing work that was done by two of TDL's working groups. First off, the TDL Data Management Working Group, which had kind of established and identified that there's a real need for a repository like this that can offer researchers at Texas higher education institutions a place to publish, cite, reuse, preserve, share their research data. They looked at a variety of different repository platforms and then settled on Dataverse, which is an open source platform that's developed by Harvard University at the Institute for Quantitative Social Science. It's a really robust open source community. And once they identified that they were going to go with Dataverse, they convened a Dataverse implementation working group that worked together with TDL staff to pilot the Dataverse instance and to implement this repository, the Texas Data Repository, as a consortial service for those of us in the TDL membership. And I'm not going to go into any detail about the work that they did, but there are some great links at the end of the slideshow here today that has some really useful information about the process that those working groups went through to select Dataverse, and then in the second working group to kind of hammer out a business model, the governance structure, all the technical considerations that have gone into launching this as a service, that might be particularly interesting for those of you who are considering looking at a repository service for your institutions. In broad strokes, it's TDL who manages our Dataverse installation, and that allows the member institutions to sort of not have to deal with that hosting and technical support angle, and let us really focus in on supporting our researchers' data publishing and archiving needs without having to invest in all that infrastructure and resources. So I can speak as one of those founding institutions to that in particular. It's been hugely useful for us not to have to deal with any of that. And also for us as part of the TDR steering committee, if we go over to the next slide, you can see a list of us. We have really become a tight-knit group over the last year and a half. There's 11 institutions so far that have adopted the service, and each of those institutions designates a liaison to the Texas Data Repository, who then acts as the local point of contact at our universities. Because of the sort of flexible platform that Dataverse is, each of us gets to decide how we're going to manage our own Dataverse within that platform, and how we're going to promote the service on our local campuses, how we're going to roll out the service and sort of drive it at our own campuses. But then also together as a steering committee, we are really driving the direction that the consortium is going through through Courtney Muma, who sits on the steering committee with us as the deputy director of Texas Digital Libraries, and she helps us to kind of prioritize development issues up through TDL, and those also get to trickle up through the Dataverse development community through the Dataverse community. So this has been a really nice way for us to feel like we each have a voice in shaping how the consortium goes, but also to kind of give each other support in terms of our experiences with rolling out the service on our respective campuses, kind of discuss progress and share resources, and kind of do the work together collectively that we might not have the capacity to do if we were all going it alone. We've had 2 working groups within that steering committee that Matt and Christina are gonna talk about in a second. And then as we go on throughout the presentation, we're going to talk each of us about our own sort of experience from our local institutions, and give you a little snapshot of what we're doing and how we're grappling with specific issues on our campuses. So I'll turn it over to Matt to talk about our training and outreach working group.
Hello, everyone. My name is Matt McInerney. I'm the Data Management and Metadata Librarian at Texas Tech University, and I am the current chair of this steering committee that Jessica just talked about. And I'm going to go over a little bit about our training and outreach working group that we had this past year. The working group was established to kind of manage and make available the resources and the outreach efforts that this group has put together, and was creating for our institutional audiences, and then make available for the rest of the consortium. So the group really focused on identifying resources for our audiences and trying to find out what those audiences were. And we kind of identified 4 audiences, which were mainly librarians. So training the trainers that would have to do all the work. Potential partners, which would be like offices of research or the Office of Vice President Research, the research coordinators, high-level stakeholders, usually faculty senate or staff senate, and then also the faculty, grad students, and the staff of the university. And so what kind of materials we can make available for those groups, mostly for workshops and videos, outlines, and lessons plans, and curriculums, presentation templates, one sheets that we call information sheets, and wording to put into the DMP tool that we subscribe to as institutions. So most of those trainings were presentations that we had done, workshops. We put up all those slides on our Confluence, our Wikipedia-esque page. The link is also down in the last slide, but I'll also put this into the chat so you can look at it if you want to. And we also did a whole lot of outreach. We did marketing. TDL made these great postcards that we could print out. They sent us a whole bunch of pens that have been given away at workshops. And we also have stickers, webinars. What is Dataverse, and this webinar specifically, and we have webinars coming up in 2019, and also innovative ways to outreach and early adopters. Jessica's done some great stuff with that. Some of her early adopters, she's given DOI cakes to with their DOI number on the cake, and mugs, and doing innovative workshops like Data and Donuts, getting people to come into the library because of the promises of donuts. We've been thinking about data and danishes just to mix it up a little bit and not copy UT so much, but we'll see what happens. The interesting thing about this working group is that we created a roadmap to what would done look like, and we actually finished it. So that's what sunsetting was. The working group actually finished all their objectives, and what does it look like? Well, for training researchers, we identified this as a goal. So we gathered a whole lot of presentations. All of our presentations are now available in the wiki, the ones that we've uploaded, and we're uploading more every semester as we do them. We've gathered all the LibGuide links and made them available, and we've created discipline-specific guidance, templates, and training videos for them. We have a whole slew of training videos for Dataverse specifically. We're also training librarians. That was another objective. Dataverse training to develop expertise and develop training curriculums for those. And also good data sharing practices and issues that may arise with rights issues, privacy, and restricted data. A lot of people want to put some HIPAA and FERPA data into Dataverse. How do we deal with that? Those issues always come up in the steering committee, and we deal with those on an as-issue basis. And we also developed a whole lot of videos for Dataverse. We compiled a lot of tools and the marketing materials for users and put all those links, made them all available on the Confluence site, so those are available for users or librarians or whoever wants to use them. Images for the postcards and the mugs and whatnot. So those marketing resources are available to anybody who needs them. And then we got to the end of the roadmap and said, hey, the working group is done, so we can continue doing other stuff. So what's next for the group? Well, in 2019, we have about 4 speakers that are going to come in January, February, March, and April to talk about data management, their experiences for their Dataverses and other topics. And then anything else that falls under the outreach and training working group is actually up to the responsibility of the greater steering committee. So we'll just fill in the blanks for whether we're doing presentations or we develop new materials. We'll just put those into the Confluence, the wiki, and make those available to the consortium. But yeah, that's the brief outline of what we did in the past year in the training and outreach working group. All right, I think I'm going to hand it off to Christina now.
Hi, my name is Christina Chan Park. I am one of the science librarians at Baylor University, and I am part of the assessment working group, along with 3 to 5 other liaisons to TDR. So last fall, the assessment working group began a project to identify the needs for reporting on the TDR, addressing these 2 questions. Which usage and descriptive information about the TDR would be most valuable, and what is the process for gathering and distributing these metrics or information that would be most useful? So the first step we did was to determine the most valuable usage metrics was to distribute a survey to all TDR institutional liaisons. So this survey was vital in identifying the widely varying resources and needs of the participating institutions, as well as well as the information the liaisons were interested in seeing both institutionally and consortially. The working group also decided that the most valuable usage metrics should allow for comparative assessment across repositories globally. In other words, we want to be good data citizens and have this data match what other people believe a repository should be reporting. So to that end, we're working on aggregating descriptions of metrics that are recommended by 5 different recent publications that suggest best practices for tracking impact research data. So these sources will be combined with the results of the survey to determine sort of our prioritized list of metrics. So from the survey, these 5 metrics were the most frequently reported as desirable: dataset download counts, unique page visits, size of datasets, size of collections, a number of files within datasets. The liaisons were also interested in getting information about the institutional researchers using the TDR, the hierarchy of the collections and datasets, the list of links of all the collections and datasets, the list of dataset DOIs. So of these desired metrics, only the download counts and unique page visits are also included in the usage metrics recommended by the best practices. So most of the other desired metrics are more descriptive, considered more descriptive information. So we hope over this next year to look at the logs that are generated from Dataverse and to begin tracking some of these and produce 2 different reports that are useful both to TDL and to the individual member institutions. And I believe we're going to start talking about what each school is doing.
All right, back to me. So you can see here some stats on Texas Tech. We're kind of a medium to large sized institution, and the capacity for data management, it's just me for data management full-time. We actually do have 3 librarians on a data management team or group that helps faculty and staff with consultations, data management consultations as needed. It's not required, it's on a need basis, and we're doing a lot of stuff in the digital resources. And the deposit model for our specific Dataverse instance is self-deposit. I leave it up to the users to choose their own fate, but if they do need help, I will mediate it if needed. And so my question that was assigned was, how have I engaged with the consortium? Well, I've done a whole bunch of documentation. A lot of the wiki that is on the Confluence, all the user guide, and a lot of the resources have been moved over thanks to my really quick typing skills. But no, that was a good portion of what I've done for the consortium in the past year. And then this year, I got elected chair, and I've been doing a little bit more coordinating, delegating, stuff like that, and really wanting to promote our own Dataverse repository and using the materials from the steering committee to do that. And at the onset of this, it's almost like you're trying to beg faculty to deposit data in Dataverse. It's kind of difficult to have faculty give up their data or put their data in another site that's not their disciplinary specific one or isn't required. So I've kind of gone to an outreach strategy that is mostly workshop oriented. It appeals to graduate students because they're starting their research here at Tech, or they're in the middle of their research and they need somewhere to put their data. So we've done a lot of outreach with workshops, telling them what data management is, why data management is important to them. We had students that came up to us after our Dataverse workshop training and said, this stuff is really cool. We'd like to use it, but a lot of graduate students don't understand why data management is important. So in this fall semester, we're doing a lot of workshops on why data management is important for you, what are the tools you can use for data management, and how does Dataverse fit into this, and why is it a good use repository for your research. So there's also, we presented these topics to our Provost Council, and the 10 gigabyte limit is definitely one aspect that a lot of faculty use as the dismissal point. 10 gigabytes, I have too much stuff for that. Excuse me, I can't use it. But the audience for this Dataverse was assumed to be only aimed at graduate students because of the small size, even by the Provost Council. However, new developments in the past couple months have given me the opportunity to present this our Dataverse as a solution for our Department of Natural Resources Management. They have a lot of legacy data, stuff they've put on hard drives here and there that have only ever been used once. And the department chair really had a concern about this. He said, these data sets, they've only been used once, and I'd like to make them available to everybody else so they can be used more than once. It's 200 gigabytes of data, but it's a whole lot of individual data sets. And we can certainly accommodate that. That's going to be a great resource for them. And I'm also presenting Dataverse as a solution for humanities departments because students, graduate students, professors, they have portfolios of work. And since Dataverse can use any kind of type, any kind of file type, and will ingest that, they can use their Dataverses for their work portfolios, easily link them using the DOIs and give them to agencies or whatnot for employment. So I think that's a good resource. Looking at the humanities, Dataverse doesn't have to just be scientific or mathematical data sets. Humanities work, art, performances, images, videos, they can all be in the Dataverse as a data set and be available. So that's what we're doing at Texas Tech. I'll hand it off to the next person, Nerissa.
Hi, I'm Nerissa Lindsay. I am the catalog librarian at Texas A&M International University. We're a small to medium-sized branch of the A&M system down in Laredo, Texas. We don't have a dedicated librarian to work with the Texas Data Repository. Right now the work is being spread between me and the acquisitions librarian, just kind of an oddball crew to be working on this kind of thing, but we're holding our own. Our deposit model is self-deposit, but we do deploy mediated deposit when as needed. And my question that was assigned to answer was, what has my experience working with researchers using the TDR been like so far? And I have to say, so far the experience has been sort of a little rushed, sort of like opening day at a new restaurant where you're ready in theory, but when you open the door and everyone pours in, you feel a bit overwhelmed. It wasn't that we had hordes of researchers trying to get into our Dataverse the first day. We just had one very earnest, enthusiastic researcher. He had practically knocked down our door in a panic because he needed a DOI for a grant that he was turning in. And at that point, we had just signed up for Dataverse, but we hadn't officially launched it. So we actually had to come up with a solution of putting his data up in our institutional repository as a placeholder until we launched our Dataverse. And when we finally launched the Dataverse, that same researcher was ready to go with a completely different project and needed something right away because they always need something right away. Fortunately, because of our membership with this to the TDL and the Texas Data Repository, facilitating training to that researcher has been much easier for me, especially being at such a small institution with no one dedicated solely to this process. And once I showed that researcher how to create a Dataverse, he's been doing things on his own with minimal interruption on my part. I mostly just have to play housekeeping and go in there and make sure he's not doing things he's not supposed to be doing. And ultimately, I was able to move that data that he had us put up in the institutional repository as a placeholder and then move it into Dataverse once we had it launched. So far, I've only worked with that one researcher. I haven't had anybody else knocking down my door trying to break in. So we still have a lot of work to do deploying some of the outreach materials that have been developed by our working group and deploying them locally. We did hold one training session where it was part of our distance education learning week. The acquisitions librarian and myself went and showed some potential researchers how to use the system, what its limitations are, and that sort of thing. And it was not super well attended, but it went okay. It wasn't nobody in the crowd, so that's always good. And recently, the Office of Research and Sponsored Projects contacted us to let us know that a couple of our TAMU faculty members were partnering with 4 outside faculty members to apply for a National Institute of Justice grant, and they wanted to know if the library could be written into the grant to support the project. And so if they secure that grant, I'll be supporting them with Dataverse training and helping them getting started. So for a small regional university with no staff dedicated solely to research data management, things are going much better here than they would be if we weren't a member of Dataverse and didn't have this community of support. So anyway, I'm going to pass it on to Jessica again.
Hi again. So we have a kind of the opposite scale problem here at UT Austin. And I was going to talk a little bit about the outreach that we've been engaged in here. Matt already mentioned a couple of the things. And we are basically here, we're lucky to have a full-time person, that's me, dedicated to research data services and data management efforts on campus in general. And we've got a really strong commitment from our administration to support open data initiatives. So we've been already going really big with our outreach efforts even before TDR was launched. And have, well, we now have 2 people in our research data services unit. We just recently hired a GIS person. So now I get to focus even more heavily on our repository work. But we've been basically shouting from the rooftops about TDR and our services, and make every effort to mention it whenever the opportunity arises. We went into that fully aware that doing so might result in way more uptake than we were prepared for, and it's been really useful for me and for us in the steering committee to compare these outreach approaches here at UT and at A&M University, which is a similar scale to ours. We've taken very opposite approaches in our outreach efforts. I've been shouting loudly and planning to deal with capacity limitations later on should they arise. At A&M, they've been much more targeted with their librarian has been much more targeted with her outreach approach and talking to specific research groups and labs. Here we've been just shouting about it at every opportunity. We've been doing giveaways, which Matt mentioned already. We did a bunch of giveaways to our early adopters with their early DOIs emblazoned on them. We've done giveaways during Open Access Week to depositors. A lot of open workshops about data management in general, which we always tie into the sharing and publishing of data at the end with the Texas Data Repository. We've done a lot of targeted demos as well with research groups and labs, as well as kind of training sessions for if there happens to be a data curator involved in a research group. That's the ideal situation. We can really dig in and train that person up and get that person capable to train all the rest of the folks in the research group. We've been essentially carpet bombing flyers all over campus and doing tabling events, all of the things. It's taken us about a year and a half now of that kind of noise to feel like we've really gotten the word out. We do a self-deposit model here too. And one of the things that we've been worried about is this like being overwhelmed by the uptake. So far, it hasn't been a terrible issue. We're going to be watching carefully over the next year and leveraging the work of our assessment working group to look at whether this open self-deposit model is going to result in lots of junk and garbage and unreusable data. So far, it's not been a huge problem. We've been able to kind of stay on top of junk data that gets in there and reach out to the depositors. We'll have to watch and see how that goes. But one of the things that we're doing here to address that limited capacity is to leverage our partnerships, and that's kind of what we do in general in our data management unit and our scholarly communications units, to rely heavily on our strategic partners like the Office of Sponsored Projects, the Vice President for Research, our Advanced Computing Center, the Office of Research Support and Compliance. All these folks are kind of working together to refer people to us and point them toward the data repository as needed. And then within our library, I've been working very closely with our liaison librarians to train them up and to help get them to the point where they feel like they can go and do the one-on-one training sessions with folks in their departments, that they can support, be that first line of support for consultations and deposit guidance and metadata guidance as it comes up from their faculty. So we'll see how that goes. And I think I'll pass it on at this point to the stand-in for Anna Dabrowski from A&M.
Thanks, Jessica. Okay, so this is Christy again, and I am doing a very poor imitation of Anna Dabrowski, who is the research data librarian at Texas A&M University up until about a month or 6 weeks ago. It's very sad that we've lost Anna in that position. But I'm gonna talk a little bit as I can to the experience at Texas A&M University, and Bruce Herbert, the Director of Scholarly Communications at the A&M Libraries, is also on the line with us, and he can supplement or correct anything that I say. So A&M, as Jessica pointed out, is an institution of similar size and mission in some ways to UT Austin. It's a very large research institution. With Anna, they had one librarian full-time attached to the work of research data management, and used a self-deposit model with support as needed for their use of Dataverse and the Texas Data Repository. However, as Jessica also pointed out, they took a slightly different approach to outreach and working with researchers in regards to the Texas Data Repository. And so I'll talk a little bit about the uses that they have seen for the repository at A&M. So at A&M, one of the use cases that Anna found particularly interesting and worth exploring is for researcher groups. And by this, we're talking about researchers working in teams, maybe in labs or centers, institutes, or even collaborators across universities. With TDR, we are providing a robust software platform with local support, and this is of particular value for groups that might be interested in functionalities that allow them to manage how they share data, whether it's publicly or with a trusted group of collaborators, and would like to construct public-facing collections of their data that represent their group. In the past year or so, Anna worked primarily with one research group, the Innovation Lab for Small-Scale Irrigation at Texas A&M. This is a group that does irrigation research internationally and includes researchers working at several partner institutions outside of Texas. The TDR platform allowed Anna to work with the group's program manager to set up their collection structure based on how the group gathers data, and they designed data submission workflows for researchers that took advantage of the metadata templates in Dataverse to make data submission more simple. They also set up permissions for collection administration and dataset deposit, and then she was able to train researchers and staff to work with the repository. So they took this more targeted approach at research groups rather than the more broadcast outreach approach that UT Austin has taken. Through TDL and the steering committee, we've also worked on improvements, including login support for those researchers that are outside of Texas or are unaffiliated with TDR partner institutions, and mapping metadata for data sets located in other Dataverse repositories. So I'm just going to read a little bit of what Anna wrote in terms of her conclusions about her work with Dataverse through July or so of this year. She thinks it's interesting to work with groups to use the TDR because they're likely to have more data in aggregate than individual researchers, as well as greater administrative overhead for managing data across people. This means that they can benefit from the well-developed permissions and metadata template features in Dataverse to create customized workflows. Groups are also likely to have some capacity for designating a collection manager And this allows the libraries to train someone within the group who understands the data and can oversee daily management of the collections. In TDR, a research group can maintain control over their own workflows for sharing data and the development of data set collections over time that represent the group. And then the libraries can provide software training, consultation, software support, and long-term maintenance of the digital files in the platform. So that's it for Texas A&M. We're going to move on then to, I'm going to pass it on to Christina.
Nice job, Christy.
Thanks, Bruce.
All right, do I have time to say two things?
Absolutely.
Okay, great. Yeah, everybody knows the research centers and institutes on all our campuses are some of the most prestigious groups, research groups that exist on campuses. And when a group forms like that, where there are a large number of collaborators, I know from personal experience that the needs for information management go way up. It's much harder to coordinate a big group so that it works together effectively. So in large part, we targeted those groups because of their information management needs. The idea is that data sharing could really be a data management process where the sharing was just something that happened at the end of the process. And once you convince a center to work with you, you get buy-in from an amazingly large number of people, and things happen really fast. We've always, because just like every other school, we have so few people working on data management, we have to be a kind of train-the-trainer model where we train people how to use the system and how to do it effectively, but they, in essence, do the work themselves. And we saw this as a way to have a single data librarian that would not die here at A&M, where Anna had 3 roles, training, working with these centers fairly intensively, providing workshops and training to grad students and postdocs for smaller teams, where she'd do that once a year, twice a year, something like that. Because in fact, as a former PI, I can tell you grad students and postdocs do all this work. And then do the asynchronous kind of email outreach type of things so that people could use the system as they would. And we found that was a sustainable model for Anna to have large impact across campus without overwhelming her. And so with that, if anybody's interested in working with a phenomenally good team here at A&M, let me know, because we need to find another Anna. Thanks.
Thank you, Bruce. She's hard to replace. Okay, I'm going to pass it on then to Kristina Chan-Park at Baylor University.
Hi, this is Kristina again. So Baylor is a large to medium-sized university, but we are very undergraduate focused, and we are not currently in R1, although that is our president's goal for the next 10 to 15 years. Our capacity, there's 2 librarians. The other librarian mostly helps with just reviewing data management plans, but everybody has sort of decided when she retires she will probably have to be replaced by 2 librarians, so you can imagine that data is not a large part of her job. And then I'm the other librarian who works with data, and even though right now I only have 7 departments that I'm a liaison to, I have had up to 17 departments at one time. So you can also see that data is not necessarily a huge part of my day-to-day job. So at Baylor, we're pretty good at anticipating future need. So we're of the mindset, build it and they will come, but the coming often might be 6 months, 3 years afterwards. So we tend not to promote our new services that much at the beginning because generally the response we get from researchers or faculty is like, why would we need that? But eventually they'll start asking, why don't we have this service that some other school has? And then we respond, well, we did tell you about that 6 months ago or 3 years ago, but you didn't want to hear about it. And they're like, oh, but it's so important. We need to have it. And so we roll our eyes if they can't see us. And then the problem starts then is like, once there's really interest in a service, we don't really have a plan to push it for long-term success, even though all the infrastructure is in place. So right now at Baylor, our TDR or Dataverse, we call Bear Data, which is how we branded it. We're sort of at the why would we need that stage? That's sort of the response that we're getting from researchers. Our deposit model is a little bit different from the other schools. So we have a trained deposit model. So once we've talked to and trained the researchers, then we give them to do whatever they want in a Dataverse. And so we've set up the infrastructure so that each school and college, and then each department within the schools and department colleges has a Dataverse. And so a researcher is assigned to his or her department Dataverse. So we have sort of all of that in place. Dataverse also gives you the option of customizing metadata schemes. And so the metadata schemes that we put for music obviously are going to be very different than the metadata schemes that are available to, say, environmental science or sociology. So we also have started making templates for metadata for different classes or students if we're anticipating a lot of people who will only be depositing once, and everybody will be sort of depositing the same type of data. And we have had some deposits in our Dataverse. You always remember your first deposit like you remember your first kiss, and that was a graduate student who needed a DOI for her data to put in her dissertation that she was defending in 3 days. So we sort of very quickly got everything up and running for her. And most of the other depositors right now are graduate students depositing data from their dissertations. So right now we're trying to figure out how we're anticipating need in the next few years to grow tremendously, especially as one of the areas that our president has identified as data sciences. And so we are trying to figure out how we're going to support the need, because we have very little capacity. We don't have a full-time person dedicated to this. So we need to have a good planning in place. We need to figure out how to train people efficiently and how to update that training regularly. So to that end, we are participating this summer in the DLF e-Research Network to sort of help us figure out a better master plan sort of for all of our digital scholarship and research data services, because we're sort of at the cusp. And we also don't have a dean, and we probably won't have a dean for another year or two. And so we're trying to figure out how we can move forward without a real mandate. So I think Santi is next.
Thank you, Christina. So I'm Sanji Thompson, Head of Digital Research Services at the University of Houston Libraries. And the question I'm engaging with today is, what infrastructure have you established to meet some of the emerging needs around data and around the TDR? So as you can see, we're a pretty large institution in terms of faculty and student population. Our current capacity is sort of driven by me currently, and I would say a pretty limited role, but I am part of the steering committee and do answer questions on the Texas Data Repository when they come up. We also are hiring for a research data management librarian, much like A&M. And my hope is that...
The station's really nice, though, so lots of traffic in Houston.
my hope is that the person in this role will be able to take a more active spot in the functioning of the Texas Data Repository, although because that's in a different administrative unit at the libraries, As you all know, that comes with some negotiations and expectations and roles, responsibility conversations, and all those fun things. And we currently have a deposit model of self-deposit where we will support as needed. But what I really want to talk about is how we've taken several steps to brand, launch, and advertise the Texas Data Repository over the probably last year and a half. In January 2018, we launched what we call Cougar Research Open Access Repositories, or Cougar ROAR. And I'll go ahead and chat the link to that. So this is an online interface that provides safe long-term storage for data and scholarship produced at the University of Houston community. And it makes these materials widely available to researchers around the world. So this interface, the Cougar ROAR interface, leverages the features and functionalities of the Texas Data Repository, or Dataverse, and DSpace for publication materials. And to complement the launch of this interface, we've conducted outreach sessions with select campus departments, including those in the College of Engineering and Natural Sciences and Mathematics, as a way to advertise the benefits and the functionality of TDR. And through these outreach sessions, we've generated anecdotal feedback on researcher needs. And the thing we hear probably most prominently from those, again, anecdotal feedback sessions is that a growing number of UH researchers require solutions for big data sets and for access and preservation. And key campus partners, including the Center for Advanced Computing and Data Services, or what we affectionately call Cactus, and the University Information Technology, or UIT, supply researchers with high capacity storage for research projects that are in progress, or what we would describe as hot or active data here locally at UH. These partners currently are not positioned to offer long-term access to research data for projects that have concluded, which we often describe as cold data. And the library's capacity to fulfill big data set access and preservation are sort of situated in the scope and functionality of the Cougar ROAR repositories, which aren't currently accommodating the types of data that would encompass hundreds of gigabytes or terabytes. So this leaves some data in stasis with, again, Cactus and UIT holding data until researchers determine where it can be deposited for long-term access. But we're gradually trying to change this. I'm currently working with some key campus stakeholders, including members of Cactus, UIT, the Division of Research, and the Data Science Institute, to investigate research data storage, sharing, and archiving needs. As a group, we've developed a survey instrument to administer to campus, although the exact way we follow up with researchers is still to be determined. A focus group or a series of focus groups may prove more useful depending on the kinds of information that we're seeking. But in any event, the goal of the investigation will be to develop researcher storing, sharing, and archiving use cases and identify possible solutions to meet those needs. So we're just beginning this. We hope to unveil the survey in September, or again, focus groups, whatever collection method we use. But we're excited to share the results with campus. I'm excited to share them with the TDR steering committee and with the larger TDL community as a whole. And we hope that this can help continue the statewide conversation on addressing big data. Now I'm going to pass it over to the group to reflect.
All right. So as you've heard and seen on the slides, we've had a lot of different experiences and strategies for using the Texas Data Repository. And kind of the TDR really provides a flexibility for various deposit models and levels of local support. And really the steering committee has given us the opportunity to really guide the development of the TDR and our Dataverses according to either a roadmap that we've developed or the needs based on some of our faculty. I know some of our meetings are focused on, hey, this faculty came to me and has this crazy request, what do we do about it? Being able to bounce those types of questions and comments off each other and also off of TDL has been really helpful. We've also been able to give feedback back to the Dataverse community as the big Dataverse community, and from that we've been able to develop more flexible options, such as another login for Google ID for researchers that are outside of your university. We've had our file size uploads increase from 2 gigabytes to 4 gigabytes. Although it is slow, it's actually, but it is available. And then there are many more in the works. Christy is actually going to talk about this in the next slide for what's to come. We've learned from one another by sharing a whole bunch of experiences and inform each other on our local strategies, whether it's from looking at other people's presentations and workshops, slides, and finding out how to present the information in the LibGuide, or learning from the DMP tool administrators how to present boilerplate language. Faculty are really big on boilerplate language. They don't want to develop their own language usually. We got to give it to them. How do we give it to them? How do we make it easy for them to create a data management language that includes a Dataverse? I wouldn't know how to do that unless Jessica had made a video series about it. And then also we're reducing cost and effort by sharing these resources. So I'm allowed to go in and look at what some of the people have done for presentations on Dataverse and Dataverse training, and really enhance my workshop so that I can give my graduate students and faculty a better workshop. Because let me tell you, the first Dataverse training was rough. We had people that deleted their own access to their own Dataverse and then tried to request access to the greater Dataverse as a whole. So it was rough. But in being able to grab information from other universities and other people that have done this, I've learned so much, even as chair, from Jessica, and learning how to coordinate all these lovely people in a meeting even. And then we've had the steering committee training the working group. The two working groups are working really well together, and we've been able to sunset the training and outreach one. And that responsibility is on the greater steering committee, and then the assessment working group is doing a lot of good work also. So we've come a long way in the last year, and the repository software is continuously being developed. And Dataverse is doing well, and our shared resources continue to improve.
Thanks, Matt. This is Christy back again, and I just wanted to follow up on Matt's comments about reflecting on the last year or so with some comments about what we're looking at in the future, both near term and a little bit further down the road. So we have contracted with a developer currently who is working on a few issues related to the Dataverse application on our behalf, to make some improvements and add a couple new features that we'd like to see in our Texas data repository. Those include a method for doing bulk uploads via the Dataverse API. The upload ability in Dataverse is good, but if you have 100 files, it's a little tedious. So we're working on methods for doing bulk uploads. We are also asking him to develop a way to automatically assign admin privileges to the appropriate institutional liaison for any new Dataverses that are created within an institution's Dataverse. And we're asking him to migrate us from the EasyID service that we've been using to DataSite for DOI assignment. And he's got a couple of UX improvements that he's working on. For instance, the ability to add a data set directly from the My Data page in Dataverse. Thinking longer term, we have two big things that we've got on our mind, and that the Dataverse community internationally has on its mind as well. And we're working in collaboration with that larger Dataverse open source community on a couple of these issues. One is sensitive data. Currently, the Texas Data Repository is not available for data that has personally identifiable information or health-related information. But there are efforts underway at Harvard and within the Dataverse open source community to develop methods for doing that. We also are looking at ways to accommodate larger data sets and files. So there are efforts underway again within the Dataverse open source community to use Dataverse to connect to trusted remote storage agents that might have greater capacity for large data sets. And we're looking into that as well. And I have a link here to the TDR roadmap, which is maintained by the TDR steering committee, so that you can have an idea of what all is on that roadmap and has been for the first year or so of our existence. We have a question from Chris and Fernando about whether member institutions will be able to use their own institutional data site membership for DOI minting. So within the Texas data repository, I believe you would have to use the TDR's relationship to DataSite for the minting of those the DOIs that get created within Dataverse. But certainly any institution can have a separate membership with DataSite and be able to mint DOIs for other purposes and through other platforms. And as part of this move to DataSite from EasyID, we've created a consortial DataSite membership so that other institutions that want to join DataSite and want to mint DOIs for other purposes outside of TDR can join with us and get a little bit of a discount on that DataSite membership. Okay, so I think we have come to the end of our prepared remarks. We have just a few minutes left for Q&A, and we would love to hear your questions. I'd invite you to unmute your microphone if you'd like to just ask a question on the line, or you can use the chat window if you're more comfortable doing that. But we'd love to hear what you're thinking and what questions you have for all of our steering committee members. Okay, Michael asks, for large data sets, is a pay-to-play model feasible for the TDR? Michael, that's a great question, and it's one that we've been discussing for a while. I think so. We think that we can develop a model where we ask researchers or institutions to pay for large data sets over a certain amount. A couple of things have held us back on publicizing that model. One is that we at TDL don't have the capacity to bill researchers directly for data sets, and so we would have to work through our member institutions to develop a model for doing that. And secondly, we have been doing some work with the way the repository is architected. It's hosted in Amazon Web Services, and there have been some changes to the way the platform works so that we can use Amazon S3 for the asset store for the actual files, and that changes the cost considerably. So we've kind of been waiting until we get to a different place with how the repository is set up before we develop a cost model for doing that. That's maybe a longer answer to your question than you needed, but that is definitely something that we're looking at as a way to deal with larger data sets, because we know that a lot of researchers have funds, they have funding to support that kind of hosting. Are there other questions? That's a good one.
Hey, this is Justin.
Hey, Justin.
How long do you think the lag will be between Dataverse 5 coming out and TDL supporting it?
That's a good question. I'm not sure I know the answer to that. And specifically, generally speaking, we tend to wait for a couple of point releases to come out past the big numbered release like that, just to make sure it's stable and the bug and security fixes have been made. But beyond that, we've been trying to keep up with new releases pretty aggressively with Dataverse. We're in the process, actually that's another thing our developers working on right now is upgrading to the latest, I can't remember, 4.8 or 9 release that's out right now. So I think there won't be a ton of lag, but we probably would wait for 5.1 or something like that before we would upgrade.
Okay.
Any thoughts on what supporting sensitive data would entail? I might ask Jessica, who attended the Dataverse community meeting on our behalf this summer, who heard some presentations on the data tags project and some of the work that the Dataverse's community is doing around sensitive data to address that question. Do you mind, Jessica?
Sure, I can take a stab at it. I wasn't able to attend a couple of the sessions that they did at that community meeting around the user interface and what that's going to look like. I think they're still kind of working out a model for specifically what this is going to look like for users. But I can tell you that the work is based on this data tags project. I'm going to pop a link in the chat window here, which you can dig into later. That they're kind of looking at not keeping this sensitive data publishing issue a yes or no kind of option. So currently the only thing you can do is either publish or not publish. And so with the data tag system, the idea is to turn that into more of a continuum of sensitivity so that there would be a range of sort of publishing options that are not only sort of human readable and understandable labels that you can turn into policy decisions and sort of ethical decisions around what to do with data sharing, but also that are machine actionable so that the system can do various automated things with those categories of data. So it's still in production. They've been working hard on it, and I think it's close to being released sometime in this quarter, if I'm not mistaken, about their roadmap. But it's basically allowing us to have a lot more granular control over what in a data set you can publish or not publish, and a granularity over the sort of data use agreements that are involved in those shared data sets and the sort of machine actionable pieces that go along with them. Is that helpful?
Yeah, thank you, Jessica. And
Sure.
I'll add too that, in addition to this sort of policy and interface work, there are also considerations for the storage itself, and the security and processes in place around where the data is stored. So we would need to work with either Amazon if we're going to store it in Amazon to make sure we're in compliance, and we've been in talks lately with the Texas Advanced Computing Center, which does have HIPAA compliant storage available to make sure that we would be storing the data in secure locations. So there are a number of considerations around doing that, which make it complicated, and which is why it takes a while to get there. but there are sort of multiple fronts of work going on that.
I just popped in the chat window a link to the Dataverse roadmap for
Oh, awesome.
releases as well. So you can dig into that. And they're quite transparent about where they are in that process and welcome a lot of interaction from anyone who's interested in kind of looking at where they are in that process and digging into contributing and watching what they're doing. So you can actually get in and see their development board and see exactly where they are in the code review and all of it.
Right. Well, we are about 5 minutes past our allotted time. So I would just want to conclude by thanking all of our presenters for their excellent presentations today and all of our attendees for joining us for this. If you have additional questions, I know everybody here would be happy to answer them, and we're all pretty easy to find, but you can always email me. My email address is in the chat window here if you have questions, and I can get it to the right person. Thank you again. Thank you, Jessica. Thanks to all of our TDR steering committee members and to Bruce for joining us today. Y'all have a great rest of the day, and thanks for hanging out for a few minutes extra. Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye. Thank you, Christy.